Arianna, it's great to see you. Do you know what? I apologise, but the first question I've got to ask you, I'm sorry, I can't get past this. So you're sitting on a plane and you see Bruno Giroud, and you go, within 2 hours, I don't know where you were flying, suddenly you're the goalkeeper for PSG and the sponsorship manager. I mean, that must be some serious chat you had there.
I'm good at talking. What can I say?
You
should have been a lawyer.
Say. You should have been a lawyer. There's chatting and chatting, but I've never heard anything like that.
So I actually have a confession. I mean, I did not know who he was when I saw him. I did not follow his career. I found it out later when everybody was shocked that I didn't know who he was, but I actually didn't know who he was. I noticed him sitting there. He's a person that you notice when he comes into a room. But I noticed really that he was sitting in front of me as you walk onto a plane and you look at your surroundings. And what really got me though was all the documents next to him. And luckily he had fanned them out on the seats next to him, which is what triggered in my mind that he had to have been at the Women's Champions League because the ECA documents were there. And that's how the conversation just took off. Hi, how are you? Were you just at the Women's Champions League?
Do you know what? I'll let you off. I'm like, so I'm going to throw in nosy as well when you're looking over his shoulder, looking at his stuff. I mean, come on. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, it wasn't that bad. He was in front of me. So as I was walking on the plane, when you look over, he's the one that put it all out there for the whole world to see. It's not like he was just on his phone and I was reading his messages. That would have been nosy.
Opportunistic, I think. I mean, it's an astonishing story. You've had an astonishing life. The other thing that I just want to ask you before we get into it, I think it's easier said than done when you're young and you leave your country to go to another country, What age were you when you left the States and went off?
Well, so obviously our system in the States is a little bit different, and we head off to university at 18 years old, and that kind of doesn't necessarily give you complete knowledge or worldviews, but it's a slightly different system. And so when I went to college, I ended up staying close to home for 2 years in Southern California, but I didn't live at home. And then I ended up going to Boston, which for Europeans is farther away from Los Angeles than a lot of European countries. So I had that kind of far from home experience already. And then I was also, I am extremely lucky that my mom is a flight attendant. And so I always knew that home was a phone call away and that my mom would find me anywhere in the world and she would jump on any plane. And so I think that really helped sometimes loneliness or just knowing in the back of my mind that nothing bad could happen because my mom would come and help. So that helped guide me and helped my wings fly, shall we say.
But it must have been, I mean, my own son's 19, he's going to Australia for a gap year to play sport. My big son did the same thing, but it's not for everybody, is it? I'm not just saying coming from the States even more so to Europe. I don't know. I just thought, you know, fair dues to you. Off you go. See ya. I'm off to Europe. Bye-bye.
Yeah, but again, I just think it was something that the way I grew up and the way both of my parents treated my sister and myself, that was always like, live your dream, go out and do it. We'll always be here. If you fall flat on your face, don't worry. Like, you can always come home. It might not be what you want to do, but if you go broke, if you bust up, you just come home and we'll sort it out. And so I really think having a family behind me, like, it wasn't daisies and roses the entire time. There was definitely a lot of things to overcome and troubles, but having that solid base behind me really did help just stay abroad and just keep plugging away and keep going. Growing up, we always traveled. My mom really instilled it in my sister and I, and my mom is very American. She can't speak another language. She's very loud. She's very friendly and talks to everybody, hence where I get it from. And just seeing her and her as a role model growing up, if my mom could do it, she gets on planes all the time. She goes to Japan, she gets on a train, doesn't speak any Japanese, wants to go see something, goes and does it, figures out how to eat, figures out how to do everything. And so I had this model growing up, and my mom's been doing it since the 1970s. So me in this era, it doesn't seem as difficult with Zoom and being able to call them and then come help me.
Brilliant. We're speaking to you as the director of women's strategy for Next Sports. What do you do?
What do I do? That's a very fun question. I do a lot of stuff. I get to have these really interesting conversations with people like yourself, and then I get to do this. Rob, how come you don't have any cool England women's stuff behind you? Where's your women's Euro?
Do you know what?
Uh,
That's a really good question. I interviewed. I'm in my house, and to be fair, one of our colleagues, Jerry, who looks after, does a bit of memorabilia and all this. So I got the England World Cup from 1966.
exactly.
Don't tell anybody, but it's got blue tack on the back and is about to fall down any second. And then
I won't tell anybody. You might have, but I won't.
I interviewed the captain of Manchester United, or the ex-captain of Manchester United, Brian Robson, who's a lovely guy, the other day. And of course, my son's a Liverpool fan, so I've got Liverpool, and I'm thinking, I've got to find something. So I'm literally rummaging through drawers trying to find.
We gotta get you some sort of women's up there. I mean, you just won the Euros. Like the women brought it home for you guys.
Everybody out there, on the back of that, we are going to get loads of women's memorabilia on the back of that. Thank you. You've put that one right straight away.
I mean, personally, coming from my position, what I would do, so now we're working on the visibility, but now we're going to cross over. I'd love for you guys to go buy it because we also need finance coming in. So while people are sending it to you, it would be great if you guys financially invest and show all your viewers why it's so important.
Absolutely. You're absolutely spot on. And you know what? You see, you're so good at this. You've segued me to my next question, my next point, which you made. I saw you make. And okay, England win the Euros, and there's a massive spike, obviously, in publicity, in interest, in the whole thing from women's football all the way down to girls' football, down to grassroots. But I think you made the point that, say, in Italy or France or Spain, they're going, yeah, okay, it was about the country that won more than women's football in general. Is that fair?
I don't know if I would say exactly in those words because England and the FA and UEFA did a fantastic job promoting the tournament. I personally went over to the tournament and you knew it was happening. You had to really kind of go under a rock if you didn't know something was happening because it was in train stations, it was in Piccadilly Circus, like it was everywhere. There were billboards. The visibility was absolutely there. And so England had this huge rush and people got more excited the more you win and the more you keep going and the more those tickets are a hot commodity for people who might not have been paying attention to women's football. It was the event of the summer. It definitely built that up in England. Had somehow the ball bounced a different way and England not won, I still think there would have been a really great uptick because people started to pay attention and there were great commercials, great advertisements, as I said. So England knew this was happening. Did that trickle down in the rest of Europe? I'm not sure. I've read and I know that Germany had quite the big uptake too because they made it to the finals and people were paying attention also to that. Did Italy get a huge push? I haven't seen the numbers and unfortunately women's football, we don't always have the best records. We're starting to change that luckily, but not necessarily. I was very hesitant to jump on the bandwagon and say that this Australia 2023 was going to be massive. But I'm so glad to be proven wrong. And I can be the first to say I am being proven wrong with the fact that tickets have sold out. FIFA doesn't know what to do, or I'm sure they'll figure it out. They just didn't expect that. And so I am over the moon that it looks like Australia is going to be in the same trajectory as what England did. So I think had England not won, I still think we would see more people going to the WSL. I still think we would see more people buying things. As many, probably not. That win and you guys bringing it home definitely made a big difference, but we need to now do more advertising, more visibility, more publicity in the other European countries to continue everybody growing at the same time.
Yeah, what you don't want is we love football during the Euros or we love it during the World Cup. You want to love it in general. I know another point that you're very keen about in the promotion. And also, let's get this right, you don't like calling it women's football. It's football, isn't it? Why should it be women's football?
It's football. Exactly. So I can argue this though. I'm cool if we call it women's football as long as we talk about the men's World Cup that's about to happen and we call it the men's World Cup that's about to happen and not just the World Cup.
Yeah. Sorry, the point I was going to make is I think you believe that one of the big ways for promotion and advertising and getting the good stories out there is digital marketing from a women's football point of view, because I read a stat and I couldn't believe it, that the mainstream media, there's only 4% of women's football is covered by what you'd call mainstream. I thought that was incredible, which obviously opens up to what you're saying.
Absolutely. I mean, not just from a marketing perspective or a financial perspective of showing what's going on or getting those clips, but we know that women's sports, and not just women's football, but women's sports. I'm also a fan of, like, let all the boats rise with the rising tide. We can't just have women's football take off. We need more sports coming with us. Is that they don't show it on the major channels. I won't name them. I mean, actually in England, there's a big broadcaster that's doing well. I'm not going to just call out broadcasters though. But OTT, that's where women's football lives. And then we've seen other big broadcasters, and I will call them out because they've done a great job. DAZN came in and they really put their money where their mouth was, and putting money in Women's Champions League, doing all the different deals they're doing, make sure Women's Champions League is getting the same recognition kind of that Men's Champions League gets around the world, because now people know where to go find it with their deal with YouTube. You go on YouTube, you can find all the Women's Champions League games in multiple languages, which is also very cool. This is really showing where women's football is, but this has been a common thing even in my day. Quite a few years ago when I played in Italy, the only place my parents would ever be able to see my game if it was possibly being shown online. There's none of our channels, even though we have 350 channels in the United States, if you turn on your TV, we're going to show a women's soccer game. So OTT is just where women know to go and where we know how to find what's going on. And even then it can be really complicated. So going back to that first question, this is one of the things that those other countries in Europe and around the world can be solving to get more visibility, is helping the people know, where do you find women's football? We know where to find Women's Champions League, but what about the regular league? What about the second division? What about other divisions or other tournaments or disabled football or whatever that might be? If people want to be able to find it, we don't know where to go look, and it makes it really complicated. Though I would say women's football fans, not just women, like women's football fans, male, female, age, doesn't matter, are more tech savvy and are more inclined to go try to search it out. They don't need it to be on prime time in order to make sure they're trying to watch it.
Does the development come from money coming in at the very top of the game, or from a grassroots perspective, or is it a combination of both?
I think it's a combination of everything. I think it's a combination of a lot of women and male allies stepping up and saying, it's the time, we need to start paying attention to this. So it's telling your friends, it's getting you to have more stuff in the background at your house, and then your friends buying more memorabilia.
Well noted, well made, and will be
and a little domino chain effect. But it really is just word of mouth. It's not, and this is something that we try to work with, and especially at Next, talking about it. Yes, if you want to employ our services, we do charge a fee. It's how we survive. It's life. But by working, it's not necessarily, I'm not going to tell you, okay, great, the way you improve your women's team is to get in $100 million. No, there's a lot of things internally with the funds that you already have. If you put them in a different way, if you start looking at things differently, you can do some great stuff for little money or none at all. It's just rearranging the way things are going. And so we need to start looking at women's, it's like a startup company or entrepreneurs, and the way you're looking at your company. It's not that you can just keep getting new investors. And by that, it means you can't just go, if you're connected to a top men's team, and keep requesting money. That's not going to allow us to stand on our own 2 feet. We want to build a sustainable model within women's football. So God forbid there was another pandemic or anything happened and there was an instability in the market, the first thing that's cut isn't women's sports and isn't women's football. And so how do we do that? It's by looking at what your club does, how your organization does it, where money can be spent. And if you've listened to any of my talks, you'd also know that I'm not one to say I love that money's coming in and that female players are making more money. But for a lot of clubs, that can also be scary, and they don't want it to turn out like the men, and they think that if they bring in a women's team, they have to pay these astronomical salaries. For me, we need to focus for the next 5 to 10 years, not necessarily on salary. We need all the players at a completely living professional wage, but then we need to invest money into the human resources behind the game. Do you have a standalone marketing person? Do you have a person guiding sponsorship? Do you have a person on social media making sure that that content is getting there? Who's paying for these roles, and how are we developing those people into those roles to make sure they know how to do it for women's football? Yeah, so I went off on a little tangent there. Sorry, Rob, but
that's fine. You go on as many tangents as you like. I mean, you put me off a tangent because I was going to say I do think it's fascinating now with the WSL, for example, in our country. And it's an interesting point. does money come into the big clubs, the Chelseas, perhaps the Liverpools, Newcastle? I know they're not in the WSL, but those big clubs funded that way. So suddenly you've got an elite, which leaves everybody behind, because I think one of the problems even in the men's game in England and some of the leagues, there's no competition. The big clubs are so big, they're over the hill and far away. Where at the moment, the women's game has got a chance to go, hang on, do we go that way? Or do we do equal opportunity for all?
100%. And I don't think, because obviously those big clubs and those big owners, they want to make sure they're winning, and that's what makes them stand out as a club and makes you want to wear the badge. But we've seen it a little bit in a weird good way and then a negative way in France. League One, you have two massive players in women's football, because I'm not sure we can say one of them is huge today in men's football. I'm sure they're going to come back again. But you have two massive players, and players especially respect. I never played for Lyon, but I have the utmost respect for them, and I have the utmost respect for Olas, even though a part of my heart is green, and I'm always going to love Saint-Etienne. That he really has invested in women's football, from the pitch to the training grounds to the medical staff to finding the top women's players in the world.
You can't knock that at all.
You have to respect it on so many levels, and him understanding it, to buying a club in the NWSL in the United States. He has 100% invested in women's football across all of the verticals that we can talk about under that. PSG obviously has been investing in women's football too, but where has that left the league? You have these massive two clubs that are always battling for the title, and when they play games, it's fantastic football. There's not a man I know or woman that doesn't dislike women's football that has watched those games and doesn't respect that game. There's a lot of other people that say a lot of other stuff about the other games, about scores and this and that, but those are fantastic football games. But now, how do we get that league more balanced? Because it's very hard for those middle tier, and definitely impossible for the bottom tier in the top division, to compete with the PSGs and Lyons. You just can't. I mean, I don't know exactly where some of those teams are today, but a couple of years ago when I was playing, we were playing against clubs that were training 3 times a week. They weren't professional players. They had to have a day job. They had focuses and lives where this was not, their end all be all. And so how do you go on Saturday or Sunday and play in a game against a team that is fully professional? Those women, they wake up, they play football, they have the doctors, they have the ice baths, they have the medical staff around them, they have the coaching staff around them, they have mental staff, they have nutritionists. Everything that their entire day and their entire life goes around is football, and they're playing against women or girls that are just not, even if you're the best, it's very complicated if you're not able to do it in the same way. And so how do we change this? And that's what at Next, that's what we're really trying to do. And we have quite a few ideas about that, as you can imagine, but there needs to be investment. As you said previously, do we need more top-down investment? Yes, but how does that top-down trickle down, and how is it then divided equitably? Because equally, I don't think PSG and Lyon need the same amount of money as Reims or Soyo or those lower divisions. Crossing the pond to you guys in England, you have there's more teams that could possibly win the league. Not all of them, but I would say there's still 4 or 5 at the beginning of the season that you could think could probably go for it. And it stays tighter, but let's see.
When are you going to be the FIFA president or the UEFA president?
So I plan to be the UEFA president. When I haven't done my calculations on the numbers, and I have to try to get it out there that I don't do politics. Like the whole idea of stabbing people in the back or things like that is just not my jam. So I'm not sure how that's going to go over in this political world that we see, especially after all the books I've read about organization.
Absolute winner on that. What a platform to say. Sorry, I can't stab people in the back. Get her in.
My bad. I will beat you on the football field. I will tackle you. I will go so hard, but I'm not going to cheat. So we'll see how that works out for me. But you never know.
It's been an absolute pleasure to speak to the next UEFA, then FIFA president down the line. You heard it here first on Soccerex TV. Hey, listen, Arianna, thanks for joining us. That was great.
Thank you so much, Rob, for having me. And I better be back on in a few months so I can prove that you've got some women's stuff behind you.
You're back on. I guarantee. Now, you're just saying that. Definitely. Let's have a catch up. Let's do it when you're free. We'll send you an invite. Let's do a catch up if that's okay with you.
Perfect. I'm in.